Greetings, Shabbat Shalom. I'm grateful for those of you who have given positive feedback about the messages that have been circulating around since the festival season. There was a minister in the old days who would word for word read a sermon. He had a loose leaf binder. And he had these various leaves, and he would turn over a leaf and turn over a leaf and just read his message. And one day, some of the children thought they'd play a little bit of trick on him, and they sneaked up there when he wasn't around, and they opened up the binder and took out one of the pages of the loose leaf binder, and let's see what's going to happen now. So the minister is, as usual, reading along through his sermon, and he comes to finally to a point. And Adam said to Eve, there seems to be a leaf missing. Well, anyway, I really appreciate the fact that these messages are going out, that people are benefiting from these messages. Today I want to talk about, my talk is entitled, Your Will Be Done. Of course, referring to, I suppose I should have used the old King James language where it's more specific because, English has changed over the years. And my English students have trouble with this concept, because now we say you. If I mean one, my wife is here operating the camera and so on, recording the message, I could say to her you, or I could speak to the whole audience worldwide that listening at any given moment, and say you, and it's the same English word. Back in the old days, I would say thy will for one person and your will for many. So of course I'm talking about God when I say your will be done. I think all of you know that. But it's interesting. Just today, we're Elvis Presley fans, and, my wife's a Mississippian. That's where he came from. And for some reason, she decided she was going to put on some Elvis Presley music on YouTube. And one of the songs that he did was My Way, and which was very much associated with Frank Sinatra, My Way. I remember a wonderful sermon that was given by one of my teachers in the old days. And he said, that's the problem with people. They want to do things their way. If you want to see what happens when people want to do things their way, take a look at the book of Judges. But I want to tell all of you who are listening that a good sermon, on occasion at least, ought to make you feel uncomfortable. And when you read the Bible, there ought to be challenges there. You ought to be, in a way, grappling with it at times, as Jacob wrestled with God. As Job struggled and finally realized that he had to defer to an omniscient, omnipotent, a loving being. A perfectly loving being that he had to defer. So notice, for example, in Acts 4 and verse 12, talking about Jesus Christ, it says, nor is there salvation in any other, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. That is the truth. That's Scripture. And so what does that mean? That non-Christians are condemned? Damned? Well, we just kept a festival season to help us understand what the Scripture does mean. But we still have to understand there is, in fact, only one way. There's just more to understanding how people get there, But there really is only one way. I want to go to 1 John 5 and verse 3. In every age, there are going to be some things that the church teaches that will be in harmony with the culture of the time. And there'll be other things that will go against the grain. It may be major things, it may be minor things. It's going to vary from time to time and from place to place. But we're never going to be in full agreement with the civilization around us. And that's just a reality we have to deal with. And we're going to have to deal with the fact that we are nonconformists. We are dissenters. We are not. We are not living the same as everybody else. Now, there are major ways in which hopefully they would agree with us, but there may be major ways also in which they don't agree with us. As I said, it's going to vary from time and place. But 1 John 5:3 says, "For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome." He didn't design his commandments as burdensome. On the contrary, his commandments are intended to give us a wonderful life. However, the world around us is going to picture them as burdensome. This, of course, is Satan's strategy, to picture them as burdensome, as he did to Eve, Let's go to Matthew 26 and verse 39. 3 times Jesus prayed this before he went to the horrific sacrifice that he had to perform for each of us, for you, for me. Matthew 26:39. He went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "Oh, my Father, if it is..." I can hardly read this without breaking up, but I'm going to read it. He went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Now, that's not an easy thing to do consistently. God's Spirit helps us to understand his will and to do it. But we don't want to pretend that it's necessarily always the easiest thing for us to do. I want to go to Numbers, the 16th chapter. Sometime I need to probably meditate about why it is. I suppose each of us has a personal story about how we came into God's church and our first impressions and how God dealt with us in our early years. In my case, when I came into God's church, fortunately, the minister that worked with me was one that I had a great respect for. And it's interesting, the first couple of weeks that I came to church, he was expounding out of the book of Numbers. And Numbers is the book that I had to study for my bar mitzvah. And it's kind of a book that has maybe a special meaning for me in that sense. But I want to go to the 16th chapter of Numbers. Now, a lot of people conflate this chapter with an earlier chapter, Exodus 32. No, this is later. And, I know the Ten Commandment movie, it had already gone for more than 3 hours. It had to come to a conclusion. So towards the end, Cecil B. DeMille wrapped up a lot of history in a mere few moments, because he had to have this huge orgy scene, After all, he did want to make money with his movie, so he had all this time that he spent on the cavorting around in front of the golden calf, so he had to kind of wrap things up, rather quickly. But let's go to number 16, and I want to tell you something that I was taught by a great teacher and evangelist many years ago, and he said, you notice that one chapter comes after another. And once you notice this, which you should have learned in elementary school, you become a theologian. Let's notice in Numbers 15.
16?
Numbers 15, verse 32. Numbers 15 comes before number 16. You ever notice that? Now, I would say this. Hollywood did notice that. And I wasn't so fond of a version or perversion of the Exodus account that I saw years ago as a TV movie. Maybe it did appear in the movies, I don't know, but I saw it on TV. I didn't go to the movies to see it. And but it did bring out this point brilliantly, that number 16 comes after Numbers 15. Let's see what happens in Numbers 15. This is a challenging verse. Here we have the Israelites in the wilderness. This is the formative years of the Israelite theocracy. They have not yet entered the promised land. They're forming their nation now. And at this time, when they're in the wilderness, before entering the promised land, public violation of the Sabbath is a capital offense. Let's go to Numbers 15:32. Now, while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him under guard because it had not been explained what should be done to him. Then the Eternal said to Moses, "The man must surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp." So as the Eternal commanded Moses, all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died. Now, you had you been there at the time, might have wondered why so harsh a penalty, and maybe that was part of the problem of these rebellious Levites in the next chapter. But this directly came from God, so your issue is with God Himself. That was His will for that time, and at another time we could discuss why it was that he did that. But meantime, that may have been a factor in this rebellion we read about in the next chapter. That wasn't the only factor. Here, people are not willing to do what God says. God had set apart the Levites to serve in the tabernacle, but a specific branch, those who descend from Aaron, were to be the priests. Now, there were some who felt like, they were Levites too, why couldn't they be priests? Well, they couldn't be priests because God said only the descendants of Aaron should be priests. So we can discuss why that is and go to God for understanding, but the rule is clear. But we have rebellion here. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of... By the way, before I go into this any further, I want to mention that Korah had children who were spared. He, as you already know, you know the Bible well enough to know Korah was punished. But I want to go to Numbers 26:11. Numbers 26:11. I'll read one verse here. Nevertheless, the children of Korah did not die. So there were children of Korah who were spared. Perhaps they were young enough that they were not really responsible. And so they were spared. And you can read about the descendants of Korah in the Psalms. There are Psalms of the sons of Korah. And evidently Samuel was a descendant of Korah. So, God did spare the innocent ones. But Korah, as you know, met his doom because of his rebelliousness. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, and a cousin of Moses, I think if we study into it. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took men, and they rose up. So there were Levites and Reubenites involved in this. And they rose up before Moses with some of the children of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of renown. Oh, so these were of the elite of the nation, and they wanted more. One of my teachers told us many times, the most difficult instrument to play is second fiddle. So they gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves." Well, God gave them that responsibility. Let's understand that. They gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Eternal is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Eternal?" What a crazy accusation. Moses was such a humble person. You can read about that in the 12th chapter. He had constantly told God, "No, I don't want to do this," right? So when Moses heard it, he fell on his face. He prayed. This was just such a difficult thing to deal with. And he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, "Tomorrow morning the Eternal will show who is his and who is holy, and will cause him to come near to him. That one whom he chooses, he will cause to come near to him." You see, God is in control. He's in control in the bedroom. He's in control in the dinner table, right? He's in control of our lives. He has, they tell you when you have a machine, when all else fails, read the instructions. Don't just kick the machine, to try to get it to work. Why don't you make some adjustments according to the manual that you have? So we have a manual about how to live. Here it is. I have one in front of me. So do this. Take censers, Korah, and all your company. Put fire in them and put incense in them before the Eternal tomorrow. And it shall be that the man whom the Eternal chooses is the Holy One. You take too much upon yourselves, you sons of Levi. Okay, so he told them, what their problem was. That's so often the case, when accusations are thrown around. It's often they accuse you of what they are doing, because what's convenient to do if you're trying to smear somebody? You think about the problems you have and figure maybe they have them too, or maybe they should have them, or you wish you had them, or you want people to believe they had them. But it's more convenient to accuse them of some vice you know about, right? And as you know, when you point a finger at somebody, there's three pointing back at you. Then Moses said to Korah, Hear now, you sons of Levi, is it a small thing to you that the God of Israel separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the work of the tabernacle of the Eternal, and to stand before the congregation to serve them, and that he has brought you near to himself, you and all your brethren, the sons of Levi with you? And are you seeking the priesthood also? See, there are people in that situation. They're not content with the role that God has given them to play. Not everybody does the same thing. The church is a body, and every part of the body is needed, right? Every part of the body. There's not a worse part than the other, as it were, an inferior part. That, as Paul talks about, that which we think is inferior, if we had to do without it, we would really notice it. We would really miss it. Anyway, verse 11, Therefore you and all your company are gathered together against the Eternal. And what is Aaron that you complain against him? See, your fight is with the Eternal. And that is true often as people, complain. Often their complaint is with the Scripture. And people, in effect, want to pick and choose what to believe or what to practice. And they don't want to look at the whole picture and defer to God's will. They have their own preferences, so to speak, their own ideas. And Moses sent to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and they said, "We will not come up." Wow, they didn't obviously want to be part of this. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land? Now look at what their attitude was, that you brought us out of a land flowing with milk and honey. Is that really the way the Israelites looked at Egypt when they were there in bondage? No, that's not what, at the time they were there, that's not what they were thinking. Out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you should keep acting like a prince over us? But this is what people do. They distort the truth. They have selective memory. They talk about the good old days that never were, and so on. This is human nature. We can see this in so many ways if we study history and just our own life experiences. And he goes on to say, Moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. So, just accusing him of being tyrannical, and then also saying, well, you haven't done yet what you said. Well, no, not yet, but they were heading in that direction. I mean, they were being supernaturally taken care of in the meantime. The context here is really, really damning on these people. But then we have to understand this is human nature. Then Moses was very angry and said to the Eternal, Do not respect their offering. I have not taken one donkey from them, nor have I hurt one of them. So it's okay to pray to God that that He deal with the unjust and with the wicked, and that He defend you, that He help you negotiate your way through life. And Moses said to Korah, Tomorrow you and all your company be present before the Eternal, you and they as well as Aaron. Let each take his censer and put incense in it, and each of you bring the censer before the Eternal. 250 censers, both you and Aaron, each with his censer. And as you know, it's a type of prayer. It's a symbol of prayer. So every man took his censer, put fire in it, laid incense on it, and stood at the door of the tabernacle of meeting with Moses and Aaron. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then the glory of the Eternal appeared to all the congregation. And the Eternal spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, verse 21, separate yourselves from the congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. So this is God's attitude about that. How dare you do this after all I've done for you? You know, maybe the best thing to do is just to start over with those few that are willing to respect me, as he did, you know, in the case of Noah and his family. But notice their attitude. Yeah, go ahead, kill them all. No, that wasn't their attitude, was it? And that's important to remember. We have compassion for our fellow human beings, and we want ultimately them to be saved. Verse 22, then they fell on their faces and said, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin and you be angry with all the congregation? You know, so in other words, putting the best scenario on it, you know, don't blame them. They've been stirred up. You know, they've been manipulated. So the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the congregation, saying, get away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Then Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, depart now from the tents of these wicked men. Touch nothing of theirs, lest you be consumed in all their sins. So there comes a time in history where a line sometimes has to be drawn, and people have to withdraw from the wickedness. So they got away from around the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of their tents, with their wives, their sons, and their children. And Moses said, by this you shall know that the Eternal has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own will. If these men die naturally like all men, or if they are visited by the common fate of all men, then the Eternal has not sent me. So obviously he's divinely inspired in what he's saying. He was a prophet to whom God spoke face to face. But if the Eternal creates a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the pit, then you will understand that these men have rejected the Eternal. This was a very important example, and as well it is to us. As I said, God, there's a bumper sticker that I used to see where it would say, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. Okay, you have to be careful how you handle that, but, you know, there's a point to that. And God wanted these people to know, as he was forming this nation, which is going to last into the millennium. You know, the nation of Israel is to be the example through history, and then into the time of the kingdom of God. Israel is the chosen people, not the better people. No, they are stiff-necked people. But God wanted one nation to be an example for the others, and to then influence the others, to be teachers to the others. And just as he wants the church to be first fruits of his kingdom and teach others, so he had to make sure that Israel got the lesson, got the point. And so it was very dramatic, no doubt, and traumatic. Now it came to pass, as he finished speaking all these words, that the ground split apart under them. And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households and all the men with Korah and with all their goods. So they and all those with them went down alive into the pit. The earth closed over them, and they perished from among the assembly. And this was an example. Now, you, again, think of the context here. God had performed 10 plagues in Egypt. God had split the Red Sea and drowned the Egyptians. God was supernaturally feeding them. He was leading them with a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And yet they still had this kind of an attitude. And he had spared them after the golden calf incident, you know, and they still had this kind of an attitude. And so he dealt with them accordingly. I want to go to Hebrews 4 and verse 12. Remember that, you know, God is judging us rather than the other way around. You know, so as we read the Bible, at times we're going to be challenged. So we have to go to God for understanding and try to conform our will to His and try to get our minds, wrap our minds around what His values are. Hebrews 4:12. For the word of God is living and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the division of soul and spirit and of joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. There's power in this word, and it is challenging. But it doesn't mean that we're supposed to get paranoid and guilty over it, because Jesus Christ has paid the penalty for us, as I referred to earlier. He has paid the penalty for us, so we don't need to be just racked with guilt. We can just realize that we're imperfect, and we're going to continue to grow and overcome all through this life. We're never going to attain perfection. Now look at the reaction of the people. Once again, human nature. Verse 34. Then all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, lest the earth swallow us up. And if there's more this is not exactly what I wanted to talk about. I want to talk about a little bit later. We'll get there in a moment. And a fire came out from the Eternal and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense. So they were dealt with as well. All of these leaders of the rebellion were dealt with. The nation was spared, but the troublemakers were executed miraculously as a witness to the rest. That should have been a very powerful witness to the rest. Then the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, Tell Eleazar the son of Aaron the priest to pick up the censers out of the blaze, for they are holy, and scatter the fire some distance away. The censers of these men who sinned against their own souls, let them be made into hammered plates as a covering for the altar, because they presented them before the Eternal. Therefore they are holy, and they shall be assigned to the children of Israel. So they were dealing with holy matters, but they were profaning them. They were abusing and misusing these holy things. So the holy things remain, but they do not. Tremendous witness to the congregation and to us. So Eleazar the priest took the bronze censers with those who were burned up, which those who were burned up had presented, and they were hammered out as a covering on the altar. To be a memorial, verse 40, to the children of Israel, that no outsider who is not a descendant of Aaron should come near to offer incense before the Eternal, that he might not become like Korah and his companions, just as the Eternal had said to him through Moses. So there are some things in the Bible that are commanded by God, and it is for us to conform and to try to understand as best we can perhaps why it is that God commanded us in that way. But, it's not for us to think that we know better than God. Verse 41. And again, now here's what I wanted to focus on, that this human nature. On the next day, all the congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, saying, You have killed the people of the Eternal. So, once again, missing the point. It's just so sad. The book of Numbers, in some ways, is difficult to read because of just the attitude of the Israelites. But they are the exemplar of human nature, and it isn't, of course, human nature in the sense that it's intrinsic. It's a demonic influence, a satanic influence that exists in the world that we can overcome, but many people become vulnerable to because they evidently have not been disciplined sufficiently by their parents, by the society at large, to where they can understand that there are, our better selves and our worse selves, and we need to cultivate our better selves and overcome our worse selves. It can be done, generally speaking. It can be generally done. And obviously they weren't doing it. Now it happened when the congregation had gathered against Moses and Aaron that they turned toward the tabernacle of meeting, and suddenly the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Eternal appeared. Then Moses and Aaron came before the tabernacle of meeting, and the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, Get away from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. And they fell on their faces. So Moses said to Aaron, Take a censer and put fire in it from the altar, put incense on it, and take it quickly to the congregation, and make atonement for them, for wrath has gone out from the Eternal, the plague has begun. So obviously here we find Aaron as a type of Christ, Aaron the high priest, as a type of Jesus Christ as our high priest, and the incense is a type of prayer. So this is a type of the intercession of Jesus Christ for us, so that we are spared. By his stripes we're healed, and were saved by his life, were justified by his death. These are points I plan to talk about tomorrow morning in the flare talk that I give. Then Moses, God willing, if I'm able to do it. Verse 47, then Aaron took it as Moses commanded and ran into the midst of the assembly, and already the plague had begun among the people. So he put in the incense and made atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living, so the plague was stopped. So these people were being punished time and again for their attitude, and it's just sad to read about this constant trouble that was there. But as I said, it is a study of how people tend to behave, as at least a certain element tend to behave. And in this case, God dealt with it in a very dramatic way, because he was working especially with this community. This was to be the chosen people, the example, and he was to bring those 20 and under into the promised land, and the others were to be in the wilderness, but they were to maintain proper standards while living in the wilderness. They were being supernaturally sustained, and so he dealt with them in a very specific way to bring that lesson home to them and to the generations in the future that would read of it, as I'm reading of it, as you're hearing me read of it, as you're reading of it along with me, hopefully. And let's go to verse 48. And he stood between the dead and the living, so the plague was stopped. And those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died in the Korah incident. So Aaron returned to Moses at the door of the tabernacle meeting. I'm in verse 50 now of number 16. I had planned to go further, but I'll stick with just number 16. I guess I've said enough. I've said a mouthful just out of this one chapter. So Aaron returned to Moses at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, for the plague had stopped. And ultimately, indeed, plagues will stop. The self-destructive behavior of human beings is going to change radically for the better in the millennium. And we've just been talking about that recently during the festival season, looking forward to that time when Jesus Christ rules directly on this earth, and under him the resurrected saints, and a very different world exists at that time. But we do have to understand that at this point in time, we have inspired words preserved for us, and in many cases preserved at great sacrifice over the centuries. People struggling to make this available, to translate it so people could read it in their own language and be able to deal with the material and so on, and be able to make a decision for themselves. Not that you're a law unto yourself, but that you can actually for yourselves read the instructions and think about them and apply them. And yes, we should be interacting with others, and we should have teachers, but also each of us should have direct access and be responsible ourselves to read God's word and to understand it as best we can, and to do it as best we can. So I want to finish up by going to the model prayer that we're given and I'll go to Matthew 6. Matthew 6. Here, Jesus asks us to pray for God's kingdom. And certainly, if you keep up with news, and I was always interested in keeping up with the news even as a small child. I remember which candidate for president I supported when I was 7 years old. And by the way, he lost. But anyway, I was interested in the news. When I was in the 5th grade, I used to watch a fellow named John Daly on ABC. And he would always end his programs by saying, "Good night and a good tomorrow." So I guess that really does date me. Maybe none of you remember John Daly and "Good night and a good tomorrow." But anyway, if you're interested in news at all, then of course it's going to motivate you to pray for God's kingdom. Or even if you're not interested in news, just daily life causes you to pray, "Your kingdom come." But notice the rest of the phrase, Matthew 10:6. "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Oh, indeed, that should be our prayer And we should strive for that standard personally, looking to God. Your will be done. Well, John Daly used to say, good night and a good tomorrow. I say, all the best to you and yours.